So we have arrived at what is probably one of the most beautiful sites that I think we've been to today. This is the Easneye estate, which is owned by Nicholas and Henrietta, and flowing through it we have the Ash. I say flowing through it, we actually just rode through it as well. And this is a really good example of how the Wildlife Trust are working with private landowners to better the environment for both parties, really, and also importantly that this is a large-scale project. We've seen Tim this morning, very early on. He's followed our travels, and Tim, explain why this is so important and why conservation on this scale, because this is a big site, is so important.
Well, we're in the middle of a nature crisis. Our State of Nature report in 2020 detailed that. We've lost 76 species in Hertfordshire over the last 50 years. Another 1,400 species are of conservation concern,
Sure.
so need positive conservation work to do that. And if we're really going to affect change and turn around that nature crisis which we're facing at the moment, we have to look beyond nature reserves.
Yes.
In Hertfordshire, from the Wildlife Trust perspective, we've got about 2,000 acres of nature reserves. This estate, on its own, is 2,000 acres.
Right.
And this is within the management of the Buxton family and has been for generations now. And we've been working with the family for the last 20 years or so, trying to help them to get the best out of the estate for nature conservation, and at the same time complement what we're doing a mile that way.
Right.
So where you've just come from, the Amwell Nature Reserve is literally a mile that way, and the River Ash flows into the River Lee at Amwell.
Okay. Yep.
So we manage 110 acres of wetlands at Amwell. That's part of the Lee Valley Regional Park, which is 10,000 acres, which goes all the way down to the Thames. And Nicholas and Henrietta look after these 2,000 acres. So when you start putting those sorts of areas of land together, we can start really making a difference and turning that nature crisis round, because the estate here essentially is a microcosm of Hertfordshire. They have hornbeam oak woodlands, the classic Hertfordshire woodland full of bluebells in the spring. They have vast swathes of grassland, as you can see on the valley side here.
Cool.
They've got wetlands in the form of a chalk river, obviously our globally rare habitat flowing past us here, but also a number of ponds. Henrietta has been working really hard over the last few years to put more ponds into the estate and restore the ponds that she has. And if you put all of those together with the river at its core, there's a huge opportunity to contribute to reversing that nature crisis here. And so that's what we're doing within the wider countryside team within Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust, is essentially working with the people that have the land.
Sure.
To look beyond nature reserves. Nature reserves are our gems, which we as the Wildlife Trust manage to optimise, but they're in isolation and they're fragments of the landscape. Yeah. So by working and optimising the habitats in the nature reserves and then working wherever we can with other landowners, we can start making a difference. And so, you know, we will work with whoever has the land. So we've done a lot with golf courses, because essentially golf courses are nature reserves where people chase a ball around. We work with schools, we work with farmers, and increasingly we're working with local authorities. So, for example, the Wilder St Albans project, which you visited yesterday. It's all about helping anybody who wants to do the best for nature conservation to make a difference.
And joining up all of these green dots that are across the county.
Yeah. We need more wildlife space, we need better managed wildlife space, we need to join it all together. And by working with individuals, be they somebody who has a small back garden or whether they have 5,000, 10,000 acres, they need the advice and guidance to help get the best out of that. And the Wildlife Trust, you know, we have the ecologists, we have the expertise to help do that and prioritise what needs to be done.
Brilliant. And then it's a case of obviously putting forward these proposals. You've got years and years of data that I imagine has been collected in terms of what's happening with the habitats, and obviously if there's a decline in particular species, it's highlighting that, so that as we move forward, You then need to obtain funding, I guess.
We do, we do.
And then you can start the actual groundwork itself.
So here at the Ash, within the Easneye estate, there's about 6 miles of the River Ash within the Buxton's ownership. And over the last 5 years, the Wildlife Trust has worked with them to put together a restoration and management plan for that river from the Lee all the way up to Woodford. That has now been converted into spade-ready drawings to restore the river. So what we need to do now is secure funding to enable us to do that. We've secured a little bit for this autumn, which will tackle a short stretch of the river, but it's all there waiting to go as soon as the funding becomes available. And then we can start turning things around, because we've seen it already in the Ash over the last 5 years. Water voles were absent here up until about 3 years ago. 3-4 years ago, and now with the habitat improvements that we're making, they're slowly finding their way up. So Henrietta a few weeks ago saw a water vole chugging across the river, which filled her with delight, because she hadn't seen them one this far up. Brown trout are now breeding in the Ash. When we were doing the field work for the management plan, we saw them cutting their reds and laying the eggs in that gravel. So that's what fills us with delight, because we know we're making a difference by seeing these things happen.
And this site, by nature of ownership, is this very much a private site?
It's completely private.
So, but I mean, some people might argue, why are we putting a lot of funding and effort into a private site? But actually, the sites that can be accessed by the public will benefit once they're connected to these, and you've got species moving along into all these different areas.
Roughly 70% of all land is in private ownership and farmed. This is a farmed estate with some forestry, those sorts of things. So we can't turn our back on that just because it's private ownership. This is where the opportunity for nature conservation is. The public have access. There are a network of footpaths across here. So from an enjoyment perspective, huge, wonderful spectacles to be seen here. Red kites nesting in the woodland here, ravens, buzzards, kingfishers whistling along the river, chance of a water vole. It's full of dragonflies and damselflies. So it's a wonderful place. It is a nature reserve, but it happens to be a working farmed landscape as well. And that's where we're going to get those gains for nature conservation.
Shows that the two can go hand in hand.
They can,
actually.
yeah. And of course, there is funding from on high through countryside stewardship. It has been up until now, and then there's the environmental land management scheme, which is coming up shortly, and that will help this, because we can do nothing without the land. You have to have the land to be able to make the habitats on which the animals live. So that's why we're working with Nicholas and Henrietta and other estates across Hertfordshire.
Brilliant. And it's nice to have landowners that are really passionate and acknowledge the work that you do. And I guess then the next big hurdle, of course, is you get the money in place, you've got your plan, you need people to help out.
We do.
Lots and lots of volunteers.
We do. And that's one of the things, particularly with the water voles. It's a team of volunteers working with the Trust, go out and survey for these. So that's how we find out of it, because we need to evidence. We need to evidence what's happening. So without survey and without the right evaluation, we won't know whether we're going forwards, backwards or sideways. So it's hugely important to do that. And so within these schemes, we always try to have some sort of evaluation plan just to be able to judge how we're doing, and hopefully successful.
Yes, yeah. I mean, from what I've seen so far, I mean, it's amazing what the Wildlife Trust have done. And this is our penultimate stop, basically. We've got one more to go, and I couldn't really think of a better way to end our journey, which has been amazing.
And just to put it in,
I just want to cycle up there. That just looks lovely up that direction.
It is beautiful, and that will take you eventually down to Stansted Abbots, which was the limit between Danelaw and Anglo-Saxon.
You mentioned
this back in the first century. Yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, look, lovely to meet you again. I know it was an early start, so I think we're both ready to finish.